So you just bought a brand new Apple device, a brand new Mac with that sweet, sweet Apple silicon, those M4s, those M3s, and you're wondering to yourself, how do I get Windows on this thing? How do I get my Windows developer set up with Visual Studio and all the Windows dev tools that I love and breathe every single day? Well, I'm going to walk you through an entire setup guide for VMware Fusion Pro from start to finish, so tune in. Hey everyone, I'm James, and I've done a few videos here on my channel, me and my brand new Mac Mini M4 Pro, and my entire setup guide for not only getting .NET and .NET MAUI development set up in VS Code and everything you need to know, but additionally, my entire developer setup guide for what I install on Mac, and also how I run Windows. I run it sort of in a windowed mode, but also in a full screen mode when I want to dive into Windows development and .NET MAUI development a lot more in Visual Studio. And I just love the ecosystem on Windows, and I'm a Windows diehard myself. So I got a question from that exact video, which was, how did you set up VMware Fusion Pro on your machine? What were your settings like? How did you get it from start to finish? That's what I want to walk through today. So if you're interested in that, stick with us. And if you have questions along the way, go ahead and leave them below. And if you like this video at any time or just right now, give it a big thumbs up as well. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can stay up to date every time I put out a video here. So let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is head to the VMware website, select products, and go to See Desktop Hypervisors. That is where VMware Fusion lives. Click on that big old download button. It's going to bring you to the Broadcom website. You do need to create an account before you can get access to the downloads, so make sure you create an account. I've already logged in. If you don't see any downloads, it's because you may be toggled on the software selection, and you need to select the VMware Cloud Foundation to see all the available downloads, and we want VMware Fusion. There it is. Perfect. Now, this will go ahead and load all of the available versions, and I want 13, that's the latest release, and just the latest release that's out. So whatever version is the latest release, tap on that. Here it's going to automatically figure out that I need the Intel-based or Mac Silicon version, and you can't download it until you click that little checkbox to accept those sweet, sweet terms and agreements and conditions and all that goodness. So all you need to do now is save the file and boot up normal sort of application installation on your machine. So let's go ahead and minimize this, double tap that VMware Fusion app, and it's going to go through the entire installation process. So you're going to log in, it's going to install software, it's going to install background services, things like that that you need on your machine. It does take a few minutes, so we're just going to go ahead and let it do its thing. Now, once it finishes and verifies, you're going to need to do things like, do you want notifications from VMware? Do you want to accept those terms and conditions? And of course you do, because you want the software. And then the other thing that you're going to see next is that you're going to need to give it access to accessibility. And you want to go ahead and do that so it has more insight and access to the keyboard and mouse when you're doing this. So open your system settings and toggle on the VMware Fusion for accessibility, and it'll be good to go. Enter your password or Touch ID, and then it will be configured. Now we're going to go ahead and select our installation method, and I'm just going to select Get Windows from Microsoft. This is going to go through an entire process of downloading and getting Windows ISO set up. You can select your language and your Windows edition. I selected Professional because that's the license key that I have, and go ahead and tap on that. Again, this is going to download the entire Windows 11 distribution and then create the ISO. It'll mount it, and it'll set everything up for us automatically. We'll have a few more settings before it goes through that. So let's go ahead and give it a few seconds here as it creates the ISO and mounts it up. And again, based on your machine, how long this may take, it may take a few minutes based on your internet speed because it is downloading the entire disk. I'm just going to use the default settings for the boot firmware of UEFI. And then here, it's going to ask you to select a password for the TPM that's encrypted. Definitely write this down, memorize it somewhere. It is not stored on the Mac keychain from what I could see, at least. I couldn't find it anywhere. So make sure you memorize this thing. It's very important for your machine. Now, it's going to also want to create a new virtual disk. So just create a new one. And then this one is really, really important, which is customizing the settings of the virtual machine. I like to do this ahead of time because of the hard drive setup that is required. It's quite complicated to expand it later. So we're going to want to do that first before installing Windows 11. So first go into and let's walk through each of the settings. I mostly keep everything default automatically. Here for processors, based on how many processors you have and how much RAM you have on your machine, you can adjust it. I'm going to leave it here at the default 2 cores. Sometimes I like to bump that up to 8, for example, here. Let me go ahead and just see how many I have. On this machine, I have 16 gigs of RAM, so I never want to do more than 50%. So again, that's like a maximum RAM there. Display settings, I just set it as the default. For network adapter, I just use the shared with my Mac for my network adapters. Hard drive, this is super important. This is the pre-allocated for the virtual machine. It is not going to create this on disk. It'll be created over time. This is the maximum size, right? So it'll probably start at about 20 gigs on disk. This is saying allow Windows to create a hard drive up to 128. So here on my machine, for example, under my settings, I can see that I have half a terabyte available. So I know that I probably want to go up to maybe 128 gigs. Set a pretty decent size if you plan on installing a lot of software, because while I will walk through increasing the size of the hard drive later, it does get quite complicated. So you can do things such as like adjust the default USB, the default audio. You can give access to your webcam so it's shared with the virtual machine. I'm not going to do it now. You can do other things like check out the TPM, for example, which is what the password we set up for. You can change encryption, compatibility layers, and even figure out isolation if you want to enable drag and drop or not, which I prefer. And again, I leave all these exactly the same. So I don't change any of these settings at all. That's all just my default advanced settings. So change that first, then boot it up. Okay, so we've changed the hard drive disk space, and then go ahead and boot up the machine. And this is going to walk through the installation process. Now, don't be like me, who just accidentally didn't hit a keyboard entry. So that means that I need to reboot this virtual machine to get back into that process. So we can see that it is timed out, and I just need to go in and go ahead, and you can either, here I'm just pausing the machine, but ideally what we actually need to do is not pause it, and we need to go into virtual machine, and then we need to simply restart it. And that's going to reboot the Windows installation process. Go ahead and tap on it, hit enter, and now it's going to guide us through an entire Windows 11 setup process. Now, the reason I want to show all this, because sometimes it's easy to make mistakes when you're going through this, especially if it's your first time. Now, this is not my first time doing it, and I still make mistakes going through it. So not only just getting it set up, but also sometimes selecting the right defaults. So here, I'm just going to go ahead and select a brand new installation of Windows 11. If you have a product key, you can enter it here. I'm going to enter mine later. And then here we want to select Windows 11 Pro as the setup. Now from here, we're just installing Windows 11. So there's nothing fancy going on besides normal setup. Here we can see that it's allocated 128 gigs. So that is what we're going to select for our pre-allocation for our space. Now remember, this isn't going to create 128 gig on my Mac machine. It's going to just allow up to 128 gigs. Now here, for example, this is just going through the Windows 11 installation process. You're going to set up your account names. You're going to log into your Microsoft account. You're going to do everything like you would normally do for Windows 11, name your machine, and all that good stuff. It's going to download updates. It's going to install updates. It's going to do everything that you want. And it's going to take a few minutes to do that based on your speed, about how much it needs to go through and installation. But it will go ahead and get everything up and running. And eventually you will then be greeted by an entire setup process to create, log in. You will get Windows 11 here. So there we are. Windows 11 is good to go. Now, once you're set up, the very, very first thing that you want to do, and I'm pointing it out here, is that there's some weird resizing that it won't do a bunch of things. It's fixed. That's because you need to install the VMware tools. So that is what you want to do, is install the VMware tools on the virtual machine. This is going to install a bunch of different things, but additionally, the most important part is it installs the graphic drivers, compatibility layers that enables you to run different resolutions inside the virtual machine. And it also does different compatibility with the mouse, the keyboard, and other things like that. So install this first typical installation. It's going to do everything that you need to do, including install those drivers there. This is the very first thing that I always forget to do. And I'm like, why isn't my screen changing size when I make it bigger? Oh, it's because I need to install the VMware tools here. Now we'll get everything set up and we'll need to reboot our machine. So let's go ahead and reboot it here. And now, once everything is up and running, I'll be able to do full resizing, make it full screen, change it to any display resolution that I want. And this makes it a really, really great experience all around. Now we can see is that actually it reboots and it starts up fairly quick. I'm on my MacBook Air in this case, and I've only allocated it 8 gigs of RAM. On my Mac Mini, I actually have it just to 4 gigs of RAM. It's super duper quick as well. So here I'm just going to go ahead and log into my account. And there we go. And now at this point, I'll have my entire machine set up and I'll be ready to go. So now as I resize, we can see, boom, it resizes. If I make it small again, it will go ahead and resize to that window size. I can make it full screen, anything that I want right there. So we're totally good to go. Now I can also pause the virtual machine, so you don't need to reboot or shut down the machine the entire time. You're just basically freezing it in time. It's creating a snapshot right there for you, and it's saving the entire state so you can reboot it up. So now we have that big pause button that's there. Now, the other thing that I like to point out is that there's also settings for VMware Fusion in general. So if you need to change the keyboard and mouse settings there or change default applications that you want to boot, you can go ahead and change those. And again, same thing, the default network settings as well. You can always change those virtual machine settings later as well. So if you want to change, for example, some of the memory and processor units, you can do that. But notice that because it's not shut down, I can't actually change it. So I actually do need to shut down the machine fully. So here I can either resume it and then shut down Windows, or from the virtual machine dropdown, I can then go ahead and actually boot it down. So either of those things change it as well. So you can either shut it down, which will shut down the VM, or you can go into virtual machine, shut down, and then we'll shut down it as well. So those are the options that you have there. So now I can go in and I can change any of the settings. Okay, so now at this point, you're pretty much ready to go. Just start installing the software that you know and love every single day inside of Windows, like Visual Studio, and you'll be good to go. Now, as you go further along, you might want to start adjusting some of the settings inside of VMware. And you can do this for your virtual machine. Now, most of the settings like CPUs, as far as many processors and RAM that are dedicated toward your virtual machine, are really easy to change. The hardest thing to change is actually the hard drive. Now, there is a slider, which I'll show you, but it doesn't automatically change what is configured inside of Windows 11 and the space available for it. There's a lot of quirks that you need to do. In fact, you need to drop down to the command line for at least what I found on all of my virtual machines to modify some of the partitions. So that's what I want to do now, is walk through that, because you're probably going to run into that sometime. In fact, I ran into it the very first time because I didn't change any of my settings and the hard drive was only like 50 gigs or so. And once I installed all my stuff, I was running out of space. So let me go ahead and show you now how to increase that entirety of that hard drive and some of the other settings. Okay, so the very first thing that we want to do is go into the settings of the virtual machine. You can adjust, obviously, like I said, the processors and the memories, but let's go ahead and change the hard drive size and change it and increase it here, I don't know, by 7 gigs. Now, notice here that I'm increasing and I'm resizing it, but I'm not pre-allocating disk space, I'm not doing anything like that. What I'm actually doing is creating a new partition of 7 more gigs inside of Windows 11. So every time I increase the disk's size, it is going to go ahead and say, oh, create another partition for that for Windows 11 to look at. I will then need to extend my C drive or create a new drive based off of it. So that is kind of nice. If you want to create another drive, it will go ahead and do that for you. So we can see that because if I open up Finder here, Explorer, we can see that it's 127 still. So I haven't increased the overall disk size. And if I go into disk management, we can see that I have 7 gigs of unallocated size. And we can see that next to it is 127.28, and I cannot extend it. I can only shrink it. And that is because this little healthy recovery disk partition has been created for me, and it's super annoying. And what's happened here is just however this has been created, this partition is not enabling me to expand it. So I can't just expand this. So this is kind of a little funky thing that I don't know, just happens to do with VMware Fusion. And what I need to do is basically delete and remove that healthy recovery disk partition to be able to expand it. And that's at least what I found from reading on instructions. And this is where it gets a little bit not as elegant. So the thing that I'd first recommend doing is shutting down the virtual machine and creating a snapshot. And snapshots are very powerful when it comes to virtual machines because it's creating a snapshot in time that you can roll back to. This is really great if you want to use and try different preview software. You can create that snapshot and you can roll back to it. So if you want to try, for example, to install .NET 10, for example, and if you want to roll back, you can go ahead and do that and you can branch these off, which is nice. So create the snapshot first, and then we're going to go ahead and drop down into the terminal and start deleting stuff. Now, I am not an expert by all means on all of these commands and the disk management tools, but this is what you sort of have to do from what I found to be able to delete it. Now, I read a few different articles and different terminal things. First, you got to run it as administrator, and there is a disk management command line tool that you can then run that will enable you to assign different drives and then remove stuff. But this is what I found. First, go into disk part, and this is going to go ahead and put us into this command. We're going to rescan our drives, and we're going to find everything, and you can display the disks that are already partitioned here with list disk. And we can see there's disk 0 here, which is 135. We're going to select it, and then we're going to list out the partitions. And here we can see we have system, reserved, primary, and recovery. And that recovery is what is blocking us from expanding this disk. So we're going to go ahead and select partition 4. And again, partition 4 is that recovery that is blocking us from expanding. And we're going to delete it. So I'm going to say delete partition override. And that, because we've selected it, is deleting it. And now we'll have our system, our reserved, and our primary here. We'll rescan. And then now disk partition or disk part will go ahead and do it. And I can then exit, for example, here. Now, the other thing to note is if for some reason you received an error, you might need to disable this reagent C or reagent, whatever it is, Windows RE. So you want to disable that if for some reason you get an issue, run those commands again and re-enable it when you're done. So based if that is giving you an issue. And now we can see in disk management that it is gone. I now have the ability to extend the volume by the entirety full amount. In fact, you will gain a little bit back, which would be that recovery drive as well. Now note, of course, that the recovery drive is gone, and that's kind of a bummer, but now we can see that we've expanded it fully. Okay, there you have it. VMware Fusion Pro is completely set up on your machine. Don't forget, you can always do snapshots. You can roll back snapshots. That's really nice. So you can kind of do that before you start installing software on your machine or before you install certain things. So you can snapshot in between. That's really nice, especially if you want to try out like new versions of software. You snapshot, you don't have to worry about uninstalling, reinstalling, doing anything like that. Now, a lot of people also ask me, how do I share files between different devices? And you can create shares between your Mac and your Windows machine, and that's totally valid. For me, I like to kind of keep things separate. And that's just a Jamesism, because when you're building things on Mac versus Windows, doing compilations, there's different things that get set. And sometimes I feel like if you're jumping back and forth between Mac and Windows and doing builds and compilations and using the same files and folders that are stored on your Mac, it gets a little funky. So I usually pretty much just will automatically clone a repo on my Windows machine, clone a repo on my Mac, and go back and forth, to be honest with you. I know it's kind of like I'm putting files up, putting files down, but that's sort of how I work. And I like to keep things separate. Just like if I had two machines, that's how I treat it. And of course, you can always pause it, snapshot things, do anything like that as well. So check out a lot of the different options and settings. And it's really cool that VMware Fusion Pro is completely free. And then you just have Windows and insert your Windows 11 product key and you're good to go. So anyways, I hope you found this video super helpful. And you know, as I was walking through it, it was a lot of learnings again, because I hadn't used virtual machines in a while. So if you have any questions at all, let me know below, something I didn't cover. If there's any other pieces of software you want me to cover here on the channel, let me know. And beyond that, happy coding and thanks for watching.